If I told you my story, you would hear hope that wouldn't let go. And if I told you my story, you would hear love that never gave up. And if I told you my story, you would hear life, but it wasn't mine. If I should speak, then let it be of the grace that is greater than all my sin, of when justice was served and where mercy wins, of the kindness of Jesus that draws me in. Oh, to tell you my story is to tell of you. If I told you my story, you would hear victory over the enemy. And if I told you my story, you would hear freedom that was won for me. And if I told you my story, you would hear life overcome the grave. If I should speak, then let it be of the grace that is greater than all my sin, of when justice was served and where mercy wins, of the kindness of Jesus that draws me in. Oh, to tell you my story is to tell of Him. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. For the grace that is greater than all my sin, of when justice was served and where mercy wins, of the kindness of Jesus that draws me in. Oh, to tell you my story is to tell of the grace that is greater than all my sin, of when justice was served and where mercy wins, of the kindness of Jesus that draws me in. Oh, to tell you my story is to tell of Him. Oh, to tell you my story is to tell of Him. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long.
I'm not sure what this is, but let's see what it is if anybody's still here. But I'm going to look like it, but just waiting until Nicholas is done. But this looked interesting.
Where you stated, quote, "The war on poverty sometimes conflicted with the war on drugs, which often dealt harshly with nonviolent offenders, taking men away from their families and disproportionately affecting minority communities." Are these your words?
Yes.
Do you acknowledge that the war on drugs disproportionately impacted Black communities and communities of color, despite marijuana and other drug use levels being comparable to white communities?
Traditionally, that has been the case.
And I see here, are you also aware that when a formerly incarcerated person is homeless, there's a 60% chance that they will be rearrested? But if that same person has access to housing, the percentage drops to 29%.
Housing is one of the factors that is beneficial in preventing recidivism.
Mm-hmm. I'm concerned here that the war on drugs has not been solely limited to incarceration, and that the negative impact of the war on drugs has not been limited to incarceration. But also we had legislated rippling effects that also seems to have been codified in our housing system. Are you aware of HUD's one strike rule, which evicts tenants for a single incidence of criminal activity, no matter how minor, with no holistic review?
There is the ability of local jurisdictions to alter that rule.
Mm-hmm. But federally, this provision still persists, correct?
As far as I know, it's still intact.
Mm-hmm. And so a person could be stop and frisked and be found in possession of a small amount of marijuana and then be evicted or have their entire family evicted from public housing.
That is a possibility.
Are you aware that owners and public housing authorities can subject tenants to tests for alcohol and drugs?
They can require that, yes.
Mm-hmm. And I see here that we also have no fault policies where an entire family can be evicted for the criminal activity of a guest of the household, even without the knowledge of anyone in that household. Are you aware of that provision as well?
The use of such activity is extremely limited, if ever used.
Mm-hmm. But they are still codified in federal law, correct?
Is it on the federal books? As far as I know, it's been on the books for many, many years.
Mm-hmm. Do you support reversing some of these provisions?
Do I prevent which provisions?
Say the no fault policy.
I can talk about that on individual cases if you have an example that you want to talk about.
Well, I'd say, would you support being able to move some of these policies over to a more holistic review? You know, you yourself asked for case-by-case consideration. Should that case-by-case consideration be codified in federal law instead of having blanket one strike or no fault policies?
I'm always in favor of specifically what you're talking about.
Funding person. Are you in favor or opposed to adjusting the interest curtailment penalty schedule for FHA loans that are in default?
I don't know that I can say.
Intended to support low-income families.
I don't think it's appropriate for public officials in general to do that.
Okay. Do you stand by the president's decision not to divest himself of his interest in properties that
Oh, it's painful. Worse than my voice. Poor guy. I didn't endure a lot there. So I'm going to read. Oh, my mouse is messed up. Okay, I'm going to read. Let's see. Let's read this. I just don't get what people think this means. Somebody wants to help me here. I'll be watching the chat until somebody joins, but anybody's welcome to join. I'm hoping people will, but like I'm probably too soft about this. I understand Calvinists are makes more sense to me under Calvinism, but the people that aren't I'm just totally confused by this losing your salvation thing. Like, yeah, the saved people, all Israel shall be saved. That is, everybody who's of the people of God, by definition, will be saved, right? So let's read 1 Corinthians. If I can get to it. 15. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. Make sure you guys can see that. There we go. All right. Moreover, brethren, I declare unto you the gospel which I preached unto you. The gospel, that's what saves you, right? The gospel, that's what we preach to save people. Which also you have received. So they heard it, they received it. Wherein ye stand, so they're standing in it. Even by which ye are saved. Now, I think they call these conditionals, these certain words like if, unless, like with the Molinism debate with James White and William Lane Craig. What is a subjunctive conditional? If, then. So, if this, then that. By which ye are saved, if you keep in memory what I preached unto you. If you keep. That is, if you remember the gospel. Unless you believed in vain. Does that mean something? Somebody help me here. Sounds like it sounds very conditional. Last time I checked, actually, you know what? I changed my mind. I'm a universalist now. Because you know what? When everybody's resurrected on the last day, they're going to believe. And so everybody will believe in God. So guess what? God's going to say, just kidding. Obviously, you all believe now. You have to. So you're good. They'll believe after death, right? What does believe mean? Is it just a mental assent? I don't know. I got to fix my mouse. I'll be right back. Somebody join. I got to get a battery. Why don't you join, buddy? Dave, come on in. Synagogue, come on. Andrew, you can come in. I was opening the room just because I thought everybody would want to do an open mic since Nicholas wasn't. Oh, there he is. Hey, what's up, man? How you doing?
Going.
Oh, I'm trying to be, I'm being a little bit cheeky, I guess. But, yeah, the whole thing with the conditional, it just seems like when this is kind of my thinking on it, if I'm just totally honest. And I tend to understand if someone's a Calvinist more, and I'm not just saying that to appease you per se, but it makes more sense to me. But if we believe that the condition, there is a condition in the first place that you have to believe, seems like to suggest that you continue in that faith. It just doesn't seem like, if you're not a Calvinist or whatever as your foundation. And I don't mean that you're trying to make Calvinism your foundation. I just mean there is a philosophical difference. I guess I just don't understand that, because as soon as you declare someone is not saved because they don't believe it that way, then that, to me, it seems like it turns that doctrine into the gospel, which seems problematic, because it seems like the gospel is more like believing what Christ did and then trusting in that. What do you think's wrong with that?
Well, so I think there's a couple things for me. I think that you may notice I'm a little bit more careful in my statements about this than, and I don't say that in necessarily a negative or positive way, by the way, but then maybe like, what you might hear from others. But first let me explain what I mean by that, right? That is to say, I tend to think.
Oh shoot, I lost you. If you can hear me, your mic kind of like went weird and then you disappeared.
My bad. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there we go. Yep.
Cool.
Do you think in a way it's like kind of like, I can respect someone for thinking like, well, I'm really convicted that like you should believe this way or whatever, but like, and then maybe that this is kind of the position some of you guys take. I'm not sure, but like it's like, well, that person's just not there yet, kind of thing. Maybe. I mean, that makes sense too, I guess.
Well, I'll admit, and perhaps it's just my own hope or whatever, but I personally think that you are teetering on the edge of being reformed. And to be honest with you, I don't know if this is correct or not, but from my vantage point, it actually looks like if you had a satisfactory answer to the problem of evil from a reformed point of view, you probably would be reformed. I might be wrong about that, but it does seem to me like that's really the hang up. And if I'm right about that, that I think right off of the bat just makes things a little bit more like if that's true, I definitely don't want to ruin that kind of thing.
Yeah, like by declaring me a heretic.
Well,
No.
I mean, I'll just be honest, right? Because I think this is the truth, and I don't want, like, if I feel like somebody is getting closer to the truth, I don't want to scare them off. You know what I mean? And I'm just going to be blunt with you about that, because I don't feel like, you're an adult. I don't want to lie to you. And you're also a brother in Christ, right? So, which I do believe, by the way. I don't just say that. And now the thing is, there is a truth to what everybody is saying about like the how OSAS does seem to be a important gospel issue. And I think that it's not so much that if you deny OSAS, or eternal security to be more precise, I guess, that you're denying the gospel, as much as it is that the logical implications of denying eternal security are, and of course I'm speaking from my perspective, right, are denial of the gospel. And those are different things, right?
No, I respect that. I do. And I appreciate you like saying it that way, because if that's your conviction, people should say it. And you say it, you say it in a way, there is, and this is what I mean when I always say things like, some things are just, and I know I can tell like Nicholas doesn't like this when I say this, and that like it's not semantical, but like what's practical, like when you're talking about the gospel, and like that can sound like you're just being like, you're changing what the Bible says to like fit what you think works. And I don't mean it like that. I just mean like, it's what's the word I'm looking for, but it's pragmatic or something. And that's kind of like what you're describing too, is what I mean by pragmatic. If I'm using the word wrong, that's possible. But I just mean like, there is things you do for practicality's purpose, like the way you talk to someone about the gospel, right? Like you don't come at them with all this like theodicy and, interlapsarian controversies, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, and it varies from person to person too, right? Like, for example, if I'm talking to somebody who has a particular struggle with the problem of evil, right? And they're an atheist. Um, it's probably not wise for me to pick on that first, right? Um, and say, well, hey, you have this, less than high view of God, and this is why you sneak all this and all this kind of stuff. Things which are probably true, but which are nonetheless just not going to be helpful at all. And in the end, it's not like truth is the goal, but there are goals within the goal. And one of those is the salvation of souls and us actually coming to truth together, right? Because we're all brethren. And so I think there's a. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think, and I think Nicholas could be struggling with that. Like I've noticed he's made a lot of like, well, what I would say is like kind of like being mature about certain things that he wasn't necessarily as mature about in the past. And I don't mean to talk down at all. I just mean like, because I respect his things he has to say. I just mean like, some people could freak out and just like, and this is how SFT is too. I don't agree with some of the things he says. I don't agree with all the arguments. I get frustrated sometimes about it. But there is a sense where like being a Christian, there's this tension between being like letting just being okay with anything and everything, right? And then but also just being like a jackass all the time and like thinking you can bully people into the truth. There's certain people that I hung around with or whatever because I thought they had a good point. And sometimes, it's not always, you don't want to just like be the nice guy, right? But I think I'm coming to this conclusion that you really cannot bully people into belief. And if you do, and you succeed, let's say, that's no true conviction of belief. And so when that happens, you may feel like you have like you're getting a, you're doing a good work or something. But I think those people are extra susceptible to falling from a belief if they came to it under those circumstances. And so I'm probably really bad at like knowing how to handle those sorts of circumstances. And I probably don't stand up for certain things when I should. So don't let me pretend I have it all figured out. But I do think that I do constantly wonder about and think about, do I just want to get someone to agree with me, or do I want them to like believe what I believe is true on their own? Like there's a quality difference between bullying somebody or schmoozing them into a belief and, not patronizing them and letting them come to it themselves so that they actually like know why they believe something, right? Rather than feeling like they're not part of the team if they don't believe it and then just kind of giving in. And that has no foundation, does it? I don't know. There is a tension there. I don't know. Sorry, I've been blabbing.
No, you're fine. It really is, a situation where it kind of depends on the individual, and the individual is the one that you would be speaking to for certain. But what I mean by that, in the end, generally, it's always true that, and I don't mean generally as in general, but generally as in this is a rule, right? And the rule is that you're always trying to get somebody to genuinely believe something, right? Not because,
of course, yeah,
exactly, right. And some people aren't. I think some people are just trying to make get confessions and stuff like that, and it's an ego trip maybe. Not anybody, as far as that we've like talked about so far today, but I do think there are people like that, right?
Yeah.
I have a saying I like to say in my personal life usually because it's a little bit crass, but nonetheless, I guess I shouldn't hide anything from you guys anyway. I like to tell people like, look, you can put a whore in a hijab, but that doesn't mean nothing.
Hey, man, sometimes the straight truth is just a truth.
It's true, right? And it is true. I mean, if you beat up a girl and force her to put on a hijab, but she's still going out prostituting herself, then like, what have you accomplished, Nothing. You didn't actually show her her value as a woman. You didn't show her why it's holy to be modest. All you did is force her to put on a garment. And
Yeah,
that's like
a pig with lipstick is still a pig.
exactly. And so like in that sense, there's always, this necessity, I think, of, like if you don't believe something, don't say you believe something, like, because we need to come to truth genuinely. And I think that the Spirit does lead us to do that. And I think sometimes, I mean, let's just be honest. And even Peter himself said some of these things are hard to understand, right? Sometimes being hard to understand is pure simplistic, and sometimes, meaning that it's just so simple that it's hard for our brains to grasp. I've noticed that happens all the time. Sometimes it's incredibly complex, but the point is, it can be hard to understand, right? And
yeah, there's different reasons it can be hard to understand. I would say when Peter says that about Paul, I would, my understanding, or the way I've always understood it, but I could totally get this. There could be some other reason for it, but it seems like, Paul's use of language in the masterpiece of like Romans and stuff, sometimes it's hard to like parse out exactly how to apply it, right? But yeah, continue. Sorry.
Well, and yeah, so like, and the point is just to say that, we want to, not only do we want to come to these things organically, but God has ordained, and I believe this especially so as a Reformed person, but we all agree with this to an extent, right? God has ordained the universe in such a way that he has, which means he willed, in some sense, believers to struggle with the interpretation of his word, genuine believers, right? To not get it and to wrestle with it and to sometimes even fall into heresy. I mean, let's just be perfectly blunt. If there are certain, like, for example, Martin Luther, I think Martin Luther is a saint, right? And I mean that in the sense that we're all saints, right? Not in the sense that like the Catholic canonized saints. But, I think he was a very wise and devout individual. I think he basically saved the Western Church, or at least God saved the Western Church through him, I should say. And yet, some of his doctrines, I think, are false. He believes in transubstantiation. He believed in the perpetual virginity of Mary. He believed in the union of church and state, or the replacement theology that the Jews were done away with. All these other kinds of things that I just utterly disagree with. Some of those things I even think are heretical, right? Like some of them, like perpetual virginity of Mary, that's just denial of Scripture, but it's not denial of Scripture in a way that is, like I think you're damned or anything like that.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. But
yeah,
in a way, but you could argue that is I'll let you keep going.
Well, I was just to say, like, for example, when it comes to like the transubstantiation thing, I mean, the logical implications of transubstantiation absolutely deny the gospel. Like, that is just a fundamental fact. It is a representation of Christ's sacrifice thousands of times over. It is direct contradiction of the book of Hebrews. It completely destroys the whole purpose of the once and for all sacrifice. Most people who believe in transubstantiation don't necessarily put all those pieces together, and so I wouldn't say that they're damned because they believe it. But if you know the logical implications of transubstantiation and take the belief there, then I mean, it's hard for me to say that somebody at that point is within the faith, right? Because that is a harsh heresy to believe. And Martin Luther believed it at a point in time as that intelligent person. So what's my point? My point is that God has willed that we live in a universe that not only do some believers genuinely struggle with the text, but they even fall into heresy, right? And he wanted that for some reason. We don't know why, but that's what he wanted. And, whether that's...
When you say wanted it, so this is where I'm struggling with this idea. Like there's a sense in which you almost have to, if you're honest, you can't really deny, because in the sense that God allows stuff, right, or permits it, some people would say. But then if you consider it even harder, it's like, what do you mean? He could have stopped it. He could have kept it from happening. He has the power to. Does that automatically mean he wants?
It's worse than that, because, and I don't mean to cut you off, but think about that. Like, we always think of God's foreknowledge, as if it's detached from his other qualities, but it isn't, right? Like, you've heard 100 times probably, because apologists use it ad infinitum, the idea that, well, if you record a football game and you've watched it before, and then you're going to watch it with your buddies, and you already know that this game-winning touchdown is going to be a catch, but your buddy doesn't know yet, right? Does that mean that it wasn't done by free will? And it's like, okay, I get your point. Here's the problem, though. I didn't actually, like, I'm not the cause of the football game. You know what I mean? When you're talking about God, you're talking about, okay, I have the ability to cause the football game or to not cause the football game, or to cause the football game in such a way, and there's millions of ways in which it could happen, that there is no opportunity for a game-winning touchdown, or the game-winning touchdown is dropped, or whatever, what have you, right? So you're not just saying that he's divinely aware and could have stopped it. He's divinely aware and could have caused it to have gone otherwise in the first place, right? Because he's the ultimate causation. And that's the big problem, I think. This is why I always stress that Molinism is still admitting that God ordains evil. God is not just, looking at what people are doing and like, oh, I guess that's what they're going to do. You know what I mean? And then making his decisions. He's actually not only actively foreknowing them, but then is able to create or not create, or create in different circumstances, that being, right? In such a way that such and such a thing wouldn't actually occur. And this is one of the fundamental questions I think we all have to ask ourselves when it comes to this issue. We always talk about, okay, God could have had a world without evil, and God could have had a world with maximal goodness and all this other kind of stuff. Or he could have had a world with maximal evil and everything could be absolutely awful. But couldn't God have had a world, with just a little tiny bit less evil? Like, what if there was one less rape?
Like, not just not the child torture, rape, and death and painful death. Just take, at least those could be gone, right?
Or even just one of them. Literally, just think about it. God could have actualized a world in which there was literally.
But that's a slippery slope, CJ. That's a slippery slope. We can't do that now. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, it's true though, right? It's true. He could have actualized a world in which there was one less little girl rape, right? And the reason that's an interesting concept is because now we're not talking about this idea of God allowed free will and therefore there's, maximal good with all this other, whatever, right? Or the maximal good versus maximal evil, or the maximal number of people saved while having a minimal number of amount of evil actions and all these other kinds of things, right? Now we're actually talking about, okay, but like to the minute detail, could God have caused it to be even just a little bit less evil, or a little bit more evil for that matter? And the answer is obviously yes, right? And if the answer is obviously yes, if he could have caused it, not if he could have stopped it, if he could have caused it to be a little bit more evil or a little bit less evil, that means what you're conceding is God has intimate foreknowledge and foreordination of every evil act. That doesn't mean he necessarily wills it or causes it, in the sense that we think of, like, there's still secondary causation. Creatures still are depraved in their own will. They do things willingly, and all those other different kind of things. But we still have to, like, that's a fundamental thing I think Christians have to wrestle with. God could have made a world with one less stubbed toe. And if there was one less stubbed toe, there would be less evil in the world by just a minute amount, but it would still be less, right? But he didn't. He actualized the one that we're in now. You know what I'm saying? And that, I think, is a fundamental defeater for anything that is non-determinative. Because that is intimate knowledge. You're not talking about general knowledge, right? You're talking about intimate knowledge at that point. And
well, why do you think what could be the difference between God's omniscience and a world? So are you saying that you don't think there's any distinction between a world that's created by an omniscient God? Is there any way to make it so that everything isn't determined by him if he has full knowledge? Like, because in a sense it seems true, but on the other hand, I could imagine like God's having knowledge. Is it possible for that? It just seems like there's a denial of free will. In other words, like a libertarian free will as a presupposition. If you say God has all knowledge of all future events and then he creates a world, you're saying like there's no way to not say God is responsible for every act. Or, I mean, is there any way to make that distinction, do you think? Or do you think it's just because libertarian free will is incoherent?
Well, so I do think libertarian free will is absolutely incoherent personally. And it really depends on the technicalities of how somebody defines something. A lot of people define libertarian free will as the ability to do otherwise. But I've pointed out to people that at that point, there's no distinction between libertarian free will and any sort of just free will without the qualifier libertarian. And if that's the case, the compatibilist absolutely believes in libertarian free will. In fact, numerous compatibilist philosophers are cited in the Stanford Encyclopedia on libertarian free will, as far as arguing for the ability to do otherwise, both theist and non-theist. So it's almost like at that point, there's almost no distinction there. So I think a much more helpful definition would be free will with free will to the exclusion of outside determining factors, right? Meaning not necessarily like your own nature per se, but things that are from without yourself, right? Like, so for example, to say that you weren't like coerced in any way, but you freely chose and had the ability to choose otherwise, by your own sort of internal mechanism, I guess, so to speak. But I don't think that really works either, because that's actually what the compatibilist has always believed. Total depravity, right? Man does everything that they want. It does everything that they will, right? No, God is not putting a gun to anybody's head and saying, you must sin, go do this thing. Man does precisely what his evil heart desires. And so if we're only talking about, outside determination as that which makes something not libertarianly free, then again, I guess I affirm libertarian free will, right? Because I do believe a creature could do otherwise. And I believe that a creature freely makes the decisions that he makes with no outside determination other than his own self, other than his own internal nature, right? So, but at the same time, I still believe there is an ultimate uncaused first cause who has ordained the universe in such a way that creatures are acting precisely as he willed, right? Which is sort of the whole nature of compatibilism. And so again, it's like, all right, so what is our actual distinction? What are you saying here? You can't be saying that it's free will to the exclusion of outside determining factors, because I can affirm that. That's total depravity. You can't say that it's free will, the ability to have done otherwise, because compatibilist philosophers from both the theist and non-theist side affirm that. So what exactly are you saying when you say libertarian free will? And the point I'm trying to make is it just doesn't exist. Like, it's not a thing.
Does God have it? Could God have not created?
Well, I mean, does God have the freest will? Yes. Is God's will ultimately free, autonomous? Yes. But is it?
How do you know? How do you know?
Again,
How do you know?
what does that mean?
How do you know that?
Well, I guess. Well, there's a couple things I could say, actually. So I will have mercy on who I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion, right? That demonstrates God having the ability to choose freely to have mercy on us or to not have mercy on us, right?
Well, that's, I mean, yeah, but only in practical, hypothetical, playing out. But whatever he does is what he was going to do. So it's determined by his nature.
Well, see, and that now that's an interesting kind of a point there, right? Now you say determined by his nature. I don't necessarily disagree with the sentiment that everything God does is determined by his nature.
Well, here's the thing. So here's my argument. I feel like nobody gets what I'm saying, and maybe it's just dumb, but I asked the question: if libertarian free will, or the sense that we feel like we could do otherwise before we do something, which is how I'd want to define it, or that it's causal agent causation, like ultimately or whatever. Although I don't deny that there's, it has influences. But let's say if it's true that libertarian free will is an illusion, it's an illusion that just seems intuitive, but it's actually not really a thing, because you're only going to do whatever it is you end up doing, because after all, there's only one universe. and which we're all in. And therefore, if that is just an illusion, I don't see if that's the conclusion, then to endow the idea that God would have it. Why would we think that if it's truly an illusion that we think we have it? There's no reason to think God does.
Well, and again, I think it really depends on what we even mean, right? Like if we're talking about like, is God not determined by his own nature? I mean, Scripture just outright says that God is determined by his nature, right? Scripture says that God is not a man that he should lie. It's not talking about his physical abilities, right? It's talking about his nature is such that lying is an impossibility for him. The Scripture says that God keeps his promises, right? That he's a covenant keeping God, that he blesses to the 1000th generation or something like that to those who love him. All these other different kinds of things. It's not that God is like incapable in a physical sense, in a power sense, of doing the other of these things, right? God could, in the sense that he's powerful enough to, and he has the right to, tell Israel to just, go to hell in a handbasket, right? He could bless only the generation which loved him and not the sons of those who loved him, even if they don't love him, which he does quite frequently if you read the Scriptures, right? He could do all these things in the sense that he has the power and the right to, but his nature is such that it's not going to happen, right? Well, I mean, that's kind of a big deal, right? I mean, what you're saying is that God has a nature that he can't violate. And exactly as you're saying, I would agree. If he has a nature that he can't violate, it doesn't make any sense that we would not have a nature that we couldn't violate. And I think that's just obviously true. I mean, if we did have the ability to violate our nature, then there would be no need for the cross. We could just work our way to heaven, right?
Well, I would say no.
Why not?
I'm not sure why. It just seems like well, I don't know. Actually, I'm not sure. Hi, Danny.
Hey guys, what's up?
I made you a moderator.
Oh, fancy. I'm like a big deal now.
It is kind of a big deal, right? Do you think God has free will, libertarian free will, or I mean, hypothetically, right? I mean, like, if there's a creator, it's like I'm agreeing with a lot of things CJ's saying, or that appears to be the case. But it seems to me that it just seems intuitively the case that God, clearly the creator of the universe, could have not created. What do you think, CJ? I mean, doesn't that seem like that must be the case in a sense?
Well, there's a distinction between the principle of alternate possibilities and what some libertarians call free will.
That's
for instance, Craig doesn't accept the principle of alternate possibilities, but he thinks that libertarian free will is true. So he thinks that the sufficient conditions for free will is not that you could have done otherwise. And a lot of other people are persuaded by this, not just Craig, given what we call Frankfurt cases. I don't know if y'all are familiar with Frankfurt cases.
Yeah. Tell us this one. I've heard this. Yeah.
Yeah, Frankfurt cases. So I'll just give you an example. Suppose you were kidnapped by some mad scientist and they put some chip in your brain, right? If you had decided or had the intention to vote for Obama, or rather, if you of someone other than Obama, the switch would activate and then cause you to intend to vote for Obama. So you go in the polling booth and you choose to vote for Obama. Bear in mind that after he lets you go, that he placed a chip in there that if you had tried to vote for someone other than Obama, the switch would have activated and you would have then intended to vote for Obama. But in this case, you go into the polling booth and you vote for Obama, seemingly out of your own volition. But you could have not done otherwise. Right. So this has persuaded a lot of people to think that you don't need to be able to do otherwise in order to have free will, because in that case, it seems like out of their own volition, out of your own volition, you voted for Obama.
And I'd also point out too, it goes the other direction. Also, there are many, and I wouldn't be as familiar with their arguments. But if you go to the Stanford Encyclopedia on libertarian free will, or I think it's just on free will, actually, they actually list numerous compatibilist philosophers
that
who
accept
do accept it.
the
Yeah.
principle of alternate possibilities. That's true. So yeah, that means that what's being contested between the compatibilists and the incompatibilists is not the principle of alternate possibilities. Maybe some might say that, hey, on your model there you can't have the PAP and you want to preserve the PAP. That might happen occasionally, but and just in terms of what these various accounts of free will are, right? You can have either account and have either a PAP or no PAP. So then I think then to understand the difference between compatibilism and incompatibilism is in terms of how we construe determinism, right? So I think that one of the best definitions of libertarian free will is that you are the uncaused cause of your actions. That you are the originator of the causal chain that led up to some behaviors.
By the way, I would just say with that definition, you could affirm that God has libertarian free will, because at that point he would be the uncaused cause of his actions.
Yeah.
Now, could God endow that to creatures he creates?
I don't see why he couldn't. The reason why I don't accept libertarian free will is pretty much purely because of the randomness objection. I don't see any other problems. Because the idea is that suppose well, I've been over it many times. I don't know.
Well, would you then say that so in a hypothetical sense, like under those things just described, that God, if God, hypothetically, if there were a God,
I'm fine with being a Christian, and for the sake of this conversation, so it's not a big deal.
Okay, so, but I mean, like, wouldn't you ultimately say, like, you don't like a reason you don't believe in God is because you think that sort of thing is not?
No,
Okay.
but no, I don't think if you say that God is, if you understand libertarian, I mean, there are non-Christians that hold to libertarian free will. My professor is like a super hardcore leftist atheist, and he's sympathetic to libertarian free will. But no, I don't think that for me it makes a difference in the theism atheism debate. I think it's a totally separate.
I guess, yeah, because you just be like appealing to, like, if you don't see like a logical way to make it work. I don't know. I guess is the how do I put this? If it's well, never mind. Go ahead, CJ.
I was just going to say, I actually do agree with that, too, because I have more reasons for believing in determinism if I'm a theist, specifically a biblical theist, at least in my own view, right? Because I believe the Bible teaches that. But without the Bible, I would still absolutely believe in some level of determinism, and for a couple of reasons. Danny already mentioned the randomness objection. I think that is just a killer argument, personally. And I mean that not in the sense that it's great, although it is great. I mean that in the sense that it literally kills libertarian free will.
Yeah. Do you know Peter Van Inwagen, Jamie?
Oh yeah, I've heard he talk about this where it's
he's a libertarian, but he thinks that he's a Mysterian about it.
Yeah, I get that.
He's a Mysterian, and he recognizes the tension. He knows the arguments against libertarian free will, and it's pushed him to a Mysterian view, which is pretty badass.
Well, let's watch. We could watch the I know I have a short clip of him describing the problem with free will and indeterminism and stuff. But
yeah, he's known for it. He's done unique work on this issue, but essentially he says our construal it seems like he would say that you have either determinism or indeterminism, and libertarian and free will, simpliciter, doesn't seem to be compatible with either of them. So that's kind of his position. But he ends up taking libertarian free will, rejecting he's an incompatibilist, but he's a Mysterian. He doesn't give an account of how it works.
Did I misunderstand? But because I swear at one point he seems to appeal to open theism.
He is an open theist, I think.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Hi,
Yeah.
Kelby.
But I think you can be an open theist and be a compatibilist.
Good evening.
Well, it depends on what that sort of open theist, why you're an open theist might.
Yeah.
But
do you think it seems to me that would be related, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, they are related. I think. I just don't. I mean, some people take certain philosophical positions because of theological considerations versus having philosophical considerations. So I think a lot of some open theists probably are open theists because that's how they interpret scripture, but the ones that are philosophically given a philosophical account for open theism tend to think that, well, look, if libertarian free will is true, then, and if nothing grounds these counterfactuals about creaturely freedom, then how would God know these future root contingencies? Something like that. Like, how could, in other words, could an agent know a future random event?
Right, because if the future is truly open, that is for you to choose otherwise, then there is no truth value to that conditional statement or that future statement.
Yeah,
right?
something like that. I'm not too. I think the dialectic goes something like that, but I'm not too comfortable in affirming that that's what they're gonna exactly what they're gonna say. But I think I imagine that I think there is some thing in the literature about brute contingencies and knowing them. It seems like you couldn't know about a brute contingency given that the justification, like what would serve as justification. Because it seems like any kind of justification you could offer would explain the brute contingency, which is exactly right.
Well, and this is, I think, a good point for me to bring up something too in regards to atheist arguments for determinism, and I don't mean atheist as in it being an atheist. I actually mean like atheist as in they're not theistic. Like there are so many different factors which explain our behavior that it's almost ridiculous, right? Like, for just as a perfect example, right? The fact that I was born a male in 21st century America in the state of Nevada, that in and of itself determines so many elements of my personality that I don't have a choice in, right? For example, I don't have a choice in having a propensity towards anger, aggression, or arrogance, because those are typical male propensities. Those are typical male negative traits, right? And I don't get a choice in that. I also don't get a choice in having a certain guardianship view over males who are smaller than me, females, animals, and things of that nature. Now, I could choose to disregard that, but the initial feeling, I don't get a choice. I don't get to choose to be attracted to naked women, right? Or to be even promiscuously attracted to naked women, which the vast majority of men are. The vast majority of men are absolute horn dogs, right?
But you get a choice to how you respond, don't you?
That's certainly true.
But they're going to say, libertarians are going to say that there are going to be some actions that are not free. So there, for instance, there's some libertarians, I don't know, they have a fancy name, that think that even these are theological minded libertarians that think that certain sinful actions, you kind of give up your libertarian free will. So if you, for instance, decide to open the website and go to www.pornhub.com, that could lead to a cascade of actions that you're no longer in control of. So there's interesting things that they say about, yeah, there could be some actions that are not free and they're still your actions, but they're going to be some highlighted decisions that you make in your life that are in fact libertarian free actions.
See, and I guess one of the things that I would kind of say, and again, I'm speaking just, strictly, I guess, like I said, atheistic. To me, let's just keep that same example, right? Because it happens to be one where I'm pretty well familiar with like the psychology of addiction and stuff like that, which porn absolutely is a category there, but nonetheless. So if you have a certain predisposition towards porn in the first place, chances are that your father, and specifically your father, has a predisposition to porn, or that your mother has a predisposition to having promiscuous sex, right? And these are things that you can easily find, different evidences. In fact, one of the most interesting things, this will just be kind of an interesting thing on it as well, right? That has been discovered recently is that there appears to be a genetic factor in things like divorce and things of that nature. Like if your grandparents got a divorce, it is much more likely for you to get a divorce. But if your grandparents and your parents got a divorce, it's even more likely for you to have gotten a divorce. And you could say, okay, well, that's family dynamics. That makes sense. But here's where the kicker comes in. If your great, 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 great grandparents, as well as your grandparents, as well as your parents, all got divorced, then that creates even more of a likelihood that you would have gotten divorced, right? Even though you have no actual recollection of in fact, your grandparents don't have any recollection of those grandparents, right? The impact of them as far as their direct impact is long gone. The point being that the behaviors that we have are passed on from generation to generation.
Okay,
I don't think it's logical to say it creates the likelihood, right? Are you misspeaking there?
Well, I would absolutely say it creates the likelihood because, and I'll just give a really good example of that, right? Like if you are somebody who has a certain predisposition towards music, right? There is now a world of possibility that has been opened to you that is not open to most other human beings. The vast majority of human beings are not particularly musically inclined. We like music, we like rhythm. It certainly makes sense in our brainwaves, but we're not really good at producing it, right? We certainly don't understand it. I'm in that category, by the way. That's why I'm putting myself in we.
Musically?
Yeah. Well, I'm not. I'm pretty good with words, but as far as the actual music itself, I've never been great. My dad is absolutely fantastic there, and all of my other family is as well. So it's kind of interesting. He did seem to pass on the gene, but not to me. Maybe I just never even looked into it. I guess I'm not 100% sure as far as like deeply, right? But the point just kind of being,
is that a miracle then?
Oh, well, I mean, it's an anomaly, right?
Well, why do we have this tendency to want to celebrate when someone overcomes then?
Well, I don't
like the underdog story, right?
Things are contradictory, right? Like to stick with the same example I have, right? Like you have certain athletes, like Peyton Manning, for example, who athletically is not very gifted, comparatively to his peers, right? If you were to compare him to somebody like Brett Favre, who can launch a football 70 yards accurately, right? Peyton Manning's never been capable of doing that. And so you can call him an overcomer because he's one of the greatest players of all time, despite kind of being, athletically a little bit of a gimp. Yeah, but the thing is, he's still able to throw a football 40 yards accurately. He's brilliant. He can memorize entire playbooks, right? He's got a fantastic vision, right? Ability to see things develop, and he has a great understanding of momentum. So like knowing where people are going to be at certain points at certain points in time, right? Based on what their bodies are doing and what the bodies of the defenders are doing. He's 6'5" for crying out loud, right? So he can see over almost everybody. So it's like, even in Manning, it's not like 5'7", 186 pound, Fred from down the way was becoming one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. That's not possible, right? And with respect, I say that, but it's just not possible. God did not put him in such a position that athletics is open to him, at least that kind of athletics, right? And that's just the way that these kinds of things work. People have not only certain physical, but certain mental predispositions. I mean, physical abilities, excuse me, I should finish that thought, but also certain mental predispositions that actually incline them towards things. And if you don't have that, you just don't have that. And there's nothing you can do about it, right? Like that's why some people are artists and some people are architects and some people are chefs, and not everybody is all of those things.
Yeah, I think it's not like libertarians are unaware of this. They either will say that, okay, there are actions that are made independent of your agency, so they're not libertarianly free, or they're going to say something like that there's influences, but these influences are not causal. which, you know, if you're wondering what that means, I'm right there with you, but that's what they're going to say.
Yeah, and I could understand to an extent, you know, like, for example, one could make the argument kind of like you were saying earlier, right? Just because some things are determined doesn't necessarily mean all things are determined. And Jamie even kind of piggybacked on that with the idea of, like, you can choose what to do with your natural predispositions. And I even do agree with that, right? Like, not every man is a womanizer, even though that's like one of the most natural things for men to want to do. So there's truth to that, right? But I do wonder how much truth to that there even really is when you consider a bunch of other things. And we couldn't get into all of it, obviously. But let's just take the womanizing example. So as a man, you already have one determining factor against you. And we already brought up the promiscuous parents tend to lead to promiscuous children, and that goes multi-generations down. But then you have other factors that also create, seem to lead to certain determinations, right? Like, for example, if your parents were divorced and you actually were with the mom rather than the father, as far as custody is concerned, or dual custody, and she had more than one boyfriend during the time that you were living with her, all three of those things, you just got triple whammied, right? Divorced parents, you have a higher propensity to be promiscuous. Living with your mom rather than your dad, you have a higher propensity to be promiscuous. And if your mom is herself seen in your own eyes as promiscuous, which typically only means more than one boyfriend because kids don't really get stuff, then you have more of a likelihood to be promiscuous, right? And now you're getting into numbers where you're actually well over half, as far as people who are, if you're in this situation, there is now more of a likelihood than not likelihood that you're going to be a womanizer, or that you're going to be a philanderer, or something along those lines, right? In other words, the collection of determining factors is producing almost always, consistently, in consensus, you could say, the same result, right? And I think the question fundamentally is, how far does that go? Like, if you find a guy who meets all of those qualifications, but he broke that, does he have I have a determining factor as far as my breaking that, right? I have a couple.
But those are but like when you're saying these propensities based on particular, say, nature and nurture factors, these outcomes are not, you can't like say for sure what the outcome is going to be. And even if you analyze these details, I think there's this thing called like the distribution or probability or whatever. Like if you have like a million, there's a way of displaying this, I think, like where you have on a graph, right? There's like a curve where I have to find a illustration of it. But in other words, like, yeah, you can predict like how many people in a certain group with certain factors will fall into a certain category. It'll be like, 60%, and then it'll tail off on both ends. And so it's like a probability thing where you can determine like a probability like distribution, but but individually you can't necessarily do that, right? With any particular individual. And so it is a little different than just straight plain determinism in a sense, right? Or is that just a lack of knowledge, you think, that makes it so you can't determine every, you know what I mean?
I would argue actually it's a lack of knowledge, and I'm going to give a good explanation why with my own life. And what the lack of knowledge is we're incapable of knowing all of the determining factors, which is why we can get, like, for example, 75% of a certain group of people could do a certain thing, but we don't know all of the determining factors, so we don't know why it's not 100%, right? Let me just give an example with my own life. So I meet all the qualifications that I just laid out for you guys, as far as for a propensity to be a womanizer. And a big part of the reason I'm not, two, are number one, being saved at a young age, and number two, being in a committed relationship at a very young age. I've actually only ever been in one serious committed relationship in my entire life, and I'm still in it. And that those two factors did a lot in steering me away from being a womanizer and in creating a different view of women than you might typically see in somebody in my life, right? Okay, so those factors, you could say, determined me to act a different way than what statistic would expect. But it gets worse than that, because how did those factors actually come about? Well, I got arrested. When I was arrested, I went to juvie. While in juvie, I was saved, but still doing a lot of the different things that I was doing, right? So, for example, smoking cigarettes, smoking weed, taking pills, all these other kinds of things. And I get off. I'm on house arrest. I'm being very, very short with the story, by the way. I get off. I'm on house arrest. I text the person who's now my wife, because she lives right across the street from me. Hey, will you bring me a cigarette? And there you go. Like, I mean, that's literally the beginning of the story. I'm not even, you're right. So
That was your fault, CJ. That was your fault. Sorry, go ahead, keep going.
Well, and again, there is things to be said back and forth about that, right? Because there is the sense that I do think I could have done otherwise, right? Like, I accept the principle of alternate possibilities, but you notice so if I didn't make some decision that probably wasn't even me rationalizing anyways, right? That whatever the first decision is that got me on and I think if I went back far enough, I could probably remember what it was, but I was on the radar of the cops for quite a while. I was not a good kid, to be honest with you. But regardless, right? So without that event, then I don't actually get in front of a judge. If I don't get in front of a judge, then I don't go to juvie. If I don't go to juvie, then I don't, read this Bible and also the Left Behind stories, which had a really big impact on me, and decide to give my life to Christ. I also don't have the inability to go get a cigarette, even though I really crave a cigarette, which leads me to message this person, which leads her to come over, which leads us to hang out, which leads to the last 8 years of my life. You know what I mean? Like, so
okay.
Now you have me breaking the trends here. How did I break the trends? By literally almost no fault of my own. I fell into this situation, basically.
But you still had to choose. And here, let me ask you this though. Here's something where I'll push back. If what you're saying is the case, and we trace that all the way back, so when Adam blamed the woman and then the woman blamed the snake, should the snake have blamed God and God taken responsibility for it?
I don't think so. And let me explain why. The first thing is, I think that, and you'll notice, for all the blame that was passed around, everybody got a punishment. And the reason is, and I think this is a very important factor here. However it is, whyever it is.
Well, who punishes God?
Say again?
Well, but wouldn't that mean then also God should get a punishment? And I mean, I don't know. You know what I mean?
You see, and this is where I would say no, right? Because first off, so if Adam's argument was right and Eve was actually to blame, then Adam would have never been punished, right? So that's the first thing we got to consider. Because what that effectively means is that the whole idea of shirking the blame just didn't work, right? So Eve, in other words, is not being punished because Adam said she's the one who did it or something like that, or because Adam had a good argument that she's the one who did it. Rather, she bears her own guilt, right? And the same is true of the serpent. And the point that is to be brought up here from the Reformed perspective is everybody does what they freely will to do, right? We are depraved, but that doesn't mean that we don't necessarily will to be depraved. I mean, any man who's ever watched porn definitely knows that they willed that, because let's just be frank, it's awesome, right? It looks awesome. It makes you feel for a moment awesome. That's just the way it is. We didn't get a choice in that. That's just the way it is, right? So are you gonna say you didn't will to do that? Of course you willed to do that, but what your will was depraved. It was evil. It degraded another human being. It potentially violated covenant with the human being you're with. It degraded one of God's creations. It degraded one of God's daughters. All these other kinds of things that you could factor in, right? You could even bring up like, oh, well, there's all the problems with the sex trafficking industry, and are you potentially contributing to that, and blah, 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 blah. But the point is, you willed to do it, right? So could the serpent actually genuinely look at God and say, well, I didn't want to do this, but you forced me to? No, he couldn't. Of course not. Just no more than than Adam could look to God and say, but the woman which you gave me, which he did, and God said, well, it doesn't matter. You're still going to work for your food. You're still going to die. You're still going to have thorns and thistles and all these other kinds of things, right? Because in the end, you freely chose by your own will to do what you wanted to do, but your will is depraved. And that's the kicker.
Okay, well, so I want to play this clip since we're in the meat of the compatibilist thing here, because I wanted to hear Danny's response, and I would like to hear what you how you would respond to this too. This is a clip of Chris talking to a professor of theology and philosophy from Andrews University. He's a Seventh-day Adventist, but I like the book he wrote on this. And Chris asks him, they're talking about his book on theodicy. I think you've heard this maybe before, CJ. I've never heard you respond to it though, but I want to see what Danny thinks of this as well, and Kelby. I mean everybody, but something. So here it is. It's not very long. It's like a minute or two. So here.
What good would it be for me to be an interviewer if I don't let my interviewees challenge me a little bit? You touch briefly in your chapter on theodicy, you touch briefly on what might be characterized as a fairly typical Reformed theodicy, in which the reason why God not merely permits, but actually foreordains the commission of evil on the part of human and angelic creatures is so that he can display the fullness of his attributes in a way that would not have been possible had he not foreordained the reality of such evil. So I have a follow-up to this, but first, what do you make of that theodicy? Why do you think that perhaps it doesn't do justice to the reality of things?
Yeah, good. Yeah. So one version of this is called the divine glory defense. So first of all, I don't think that there are any glory-bringing attributes of God that the full manifestation of them depends upon evil in the world. That's my personal view. I think that any kind of great making property or great display of God's character or his essential nature, there's actually a form of that essential attribute of God that could be displayed without any evil. So some people point to things like, courage would need some kind of danger or something. But I think it's actually rooted in a more fundamental attribute of God's goodness that doesn't require kind of a revelation in every kind of its form. And so I don't agree with a kind of higher order goods defense that like Swinburne or others put. I know he's not coming from the Reform perspective, but he has the same kind of view that there are these goods that might not be brought about without evil. And personally, I think that there are more fundamental goods that those what he calls higher order goods are piggybacking on that would still be true in the eschaton. If that wasn't the case, then once evil is all eradicated, you wouldn't have those goods anymore if you really need evil for those kinds of goods. And so I think there's some problem with that kind of view. But more fundamentally, I think there is a problem. And I want to be as fair and charitable as I can. I have a lot of respect for Reformed thinkers and other thinkers that I've dealt with throughout this talk. So I don't mean to be uncharitable or flippant, but I have to speak about this.
You have to answer my question.
So it might come across as simplistic at first. So I don't mean it that way. But I do think that there's a problem with saying that God needed this to manifest one of his attributes, right? So if you take the divine glory defense says that God, some at least say God wants to save everyone, but it's some other good more than that, which was to manifest his glory. And in some way, God actually bringing about a world that has evil and then damning some people brings God glory in that sense that wouldn't be the case otherwise. I think this is problematic just on the level of the idea that God needs this evil to reveal something about himself. Not just in the sense that God is independent on evil, that's the same kind of set of problems. I'm not sure that it makes sense. Because it seems to me that if determinism is true, then there shouldn't be anything like unfulfilled desires in God. And there shouldn't be two incompatible outcomes, one of which God desires. Why do I say that? For the divine glory defense to work, it has to be true that, for instance, God saving everyone and God manifesting his glory are incompatible outcomes. Now, there's only two ways that I could see that those two outcomes or any other two incompatible outcomes would be incompatible. They're either incompatible because God willed that they be incompatible, in which case God could will that they not be incompatible if determinism was true, or they're incompatible because that's a fundamental feature of reality. Now, I think that if something is fundamentally true about the nature of reality, then that must be grounded in some sense in God himself, either because God wills it to be that way or it's in some way that is necessarily dependent upon God's eternal nature. And so it seems like somebody who takes that line of thought would have to say something like either God is willing or actually desiring something that is incompatible with something else he wants because he willed those two things to be incompatible, or he desires something that is inconsistent with his own essential nature, which I think is absurd. And so I don't see how God could actually desire one of two incompatible things if determinism is true. Now, if indeterminism is true, there's all kinds of things that God actually desires that don't come about because there's other agents involved that do things that God doesn't actually prefer. But if God really is determining events, it seems to me hard to make sense of why there would be something God wants that's a greater good that's inconsistent with another good that God actually desires.
Okay, so with the follow-up then is to offer for your feedback the sort of my own personal.
It's kind of hard to follow, but
Well,
Yeah.
I'd say just right off of the gate that I think that an example that I've already frequently used before actually kind of demonstrates exactly why what he said doesn't work. And that is the author analogy. It is just a matter of fact that when one creates a story, one demonstrates two simultaneously existing wills within themselves. They're not two different, like, personal wills or anything like that. It's not like you're schizophrenic. But you have a ultimate will, you could say, or maybe a decreative will, we would say in theology, which is the things that happen. You willed that the antagonist did that evil thing that made everybody dislike them, or even in a different case that the antagonist had that evil thing done to them that made them the antagonist, right? You willed that. You also have a particular will that has more in line with your actual fundamental values and beliefs, and that is typically brought to fruition by whatever the protagonist does, right? Typically defeating the antagonist at some point in the story or something along those lines. So you see there in the author two conflicting but not contradictory wills, right? And I think personally that's just the nature of creating stories with characters.
wait.
And it's only made worse if the characters are actually active agents.
Well, I think what he had in mind though is like there's a thing that God declares that His desire, and that is that all people come to a knowledge of the truth and to be saved. And so,
how's that not making our thoughts God's thoughts?
It seems, if determinism is true, why would God determine two conflicting things that don't come to pass when He says He desires both, but not both can come to pass if determinism is true? Because He says He desires to be saved. Is that not true?
Well, I just explained how, though, right? By giving an explicitly determinative example, right?
That's not explaining how. You're just stating your view. You're not really explaining how it would work.
Well, can you explain
in relation to reality?
Well, can you explain what in what I just said was not clear so that I know? Because from where I'm standing, I very clearly explained how.
You're clearly explaining your view.
Well, no, but I actually showed an application of my view, right? Like I demonstrated that the author does have two conflicting views, or two conflicting wills, rather, and that this is a rule with anybody who creates a story, right? So where in that was I wrong?
This is interesting. I think Chris may actually propose that same idea, and I could play like 30 more seconds real quick. Let me just see if I think he does.
Adaptation of that kind of glory display, Reformed theodicy. What I have, as you know, I am a determinist, and that's something I'm willing to give up if I'm convinced otherwise. But for the time being, that's where I stand right now. And of course, the question becomes, why would a perfectly holy God predetermine, foreordain the commission of sin if he's if he doesn't desire the reality of sin? And what I have come to suspect is that God wants his creatures to be able to emulate certain of his divine attributes, so to not just have knowledge of God being in this way, being these ways, but actually emulate those things. And so take, for example, the showing of mercy to somebody, or hospitality, or forgiveness, right? If God desires his creatures to emulate the attribute of being forgiving, which would be sort of a expression of the attribute of goodness, or the attribute of, we could talk about that. But anyway, if he wants his people to actually forgive, and he determines what takes place in time, then it would seem the only possible way to for his creatures to show forgiveness is if he first foreordains the reality of sin, so that there is sin to be forgiven. And so that would seem to me like a case where God has two logically incompatible desires, one of which he therefore foregoes in order to accomplish the other. So you may have already largely touched on what your response to that might be, but flesh it out a little bit more. Where do you think that maybe that explanation falls flat? Or at least is insufficient to some degree?
Yeah. So first I should back up, because I kind of neglected to just mention the kind of obvious part of the divine glory defense, where in what you just said goes beyond this, but where somebody says that God is doing this to manifest his glory. If God is actually determining everything, he wouldn't theoretically need a manifestation, because he could immediately make every creature aware of his glory in their own internal consciousness. Now you're going a step beyond that and saying, well, God wants creatures to emulate those kinds of characteristics that are themselves contingent upon being a response to evil in some way.
Right.
And therefore you need some evil intrinsically for creatures to kind of put forth those kinds of characteristics. Well, I think that the main response that I would have to that would be that I think that all of those so-called higher order goods are actually grounded in some more core goods of God's being that would be goods even without any evil.
True.
And so in the eschaton, you wouldn't have these kinds of goods. So I think it might be difficult to make a case that if there are those kinds of higher order goods that God could desire without running into the contradictions I mentioned earlier, that those would be the kinds of goods that would be outweighing, especially given that those kinds of goods wouldn't actually take place in the eschaton anymore. Once evil is done away with, you wouldn't have these kinds of things like forgiveness and compassion. But I suspect that there are analogs, or close cousins, so to speak, of these kinds of virtues or virtuous responses that would be true in a world that is only and only full of goodness without any evil. And so I don't see why God would need to create a world with evil, especially with the kind of amount of evil and suffering you have in this kind of world, to bring about those kinds of responses. Secondarily, even if one granted that those kinds of goods that appear to be contingent upon evils for them to be manifested in human virtuous living, or virtuous responses, so to speak, it seems like those kinds of responses could be evoked by a world that has a whole lot less suffering and evil in it, right? I mean, for humans to emulate forgiveness, it seemed there would only have to be one thing to forgive, and they would forgive it. And if God is determining creatures, if determinism is true, then they could just have one slight and they could forgive it, and that's been emulated, and you move on. Or even theoretically, and again, I want to ground myself more in the biblical data, but just at the philosophical level, theoretically, you could provide these kinds of responses through some kind of a virtual reality or some other kind of thing, if you really wanted creatures to emulate it. But I would have difficulty thinking of a kind of an emulation model as being sufficient for evil and being something that actually makes evil necessary to bring about some greater good. Because I'm not sure there are any goods that are responsive to evil that aren't grounded in more core goods that are greater and would be true in the eschaton without any evil in the world. I do think that it might get you around the two problems that I raised about God desire.
Well, I guess he didn't go into that. Sorry. This reminds me, though, of what, Danny, you've said before. Like, can you really, if God is good and he has some greater purpose in everything, could you really call evil evil, right? Haven't you said something like that?
Yeah, the idea is that if he's used, there, you have to think about what it means to use evil. It means that either that it's not evil or that you're limited. You know, because I would only allow an evil thing if I couldn't accomplish the same aim doing a good thing. And then, so otherwise, I just don't see in virtue of what it would be bad or evil.
Yeah, that's a problem for any view, whether reformed or unreformed, I would say.
Right. I would say, I think I agree.
It just seems to me we just have to add, no matter what view, it seems to me we have to add, because we're presented with it as there being that dichotomy of good and bad, and you got to just like add secondary causation. But sorry, Kelly, did you want to continue what you're saying with CJ? I thought there was something more on point to what you guys were talking about, and that was incorrect. I wish you would have given reasons or some examples or potential examples of these higher order goods that could, display God's attributes without evil, because that feels like it could be the case, but he didn't give any example.
Well, and I just feel like too. I mean, and I've said it before, and I'll unless I'm convinced otherwise, I guess I'll say it until I die. Barring the open theist, I feel like the ordination of evil is just something that theists have to bite. At least if you're a theist in the same way that we're theists, right? Meaning the tri-omni monotheist creator God. I mean, I just don't see a way to escape it. You know what I mean? Because
what does it mean for it to be bad? Like, why would God need suffering if everything's determined? You know what I mean? Like, what is the point of suffering if? I mean, I don't like the defense of like soul building theodicy. I don't think that's right. But
well, why exactly? I guess I'm not 100% sure, and I suspect that because God is complicated in the sense that he's greater than our ways, right? Not in the sense that he's like not violating divine simplicity or anything like that. In case there's any heresy hunters in the chat, I think y'all know who you are. But at any rate, if God is greater than us, right? His ways are more complex than our ways. And so I highly suspect that there's probably multiple reasons why God is ordained to have evil in the world. I think
that's exactly it. It seems incoherent to say that God has a reason. If God has a reason to do it, he should do it. But then that's implying the proposition that he should do something that he has reason not to do, which is what shouldn't happen, right? So you should do what shouldn't happen. You should actualize.
Well, I don't necessarily think it's a should or should not in a way, right?
What else is evil then? I just don't know what you mean by evil at that point.
Well, I don't think that. I think evil is, first off, I don't think that God is. I mean, God is the source of evil, our source of good. Excuse me, the source of morality, right? I don't think that he is capable of acting evil per se. To me, that it's a little bit like saying like, if the thing that made 2 + 2 = 4 had 2 + 2 = 5, then would 2 + 2 = 5? It's like, well, it can't. Like whatever it is that makes that true.
What do you mean by evil?
Well, as evil would be, I guess I'm not 100% sure. I know it's a violation of God's commands, right? But can I go farther than that? I don't necessarily know. A lot of people will say it's rooted in God's nature, but that's clearly not all of the story, right? Because God takes every life that has ever been taken. Without exception, and that's just a fundamental Christian truth. And yet, God says, don't kill and don't murder, and that war is bad, and that taking the life of animals is bad, and all these sorts of things, right? At least in a way, with the animal one, let me clarify, in a way that is cruel. He's not against like eating meat. That's not what I mean. But regardless, the point just here kind of being that, clearly it's not just his nature, because he tells us not to do things which are part of his nature. Or accepting worship is another perfect example, right? We're not to accept worship, but God absolutely accepts worship. So can I explain necessarily what it is that makes something good or evil past what the Bible reveals to me, which is because God said, and he has said in such a way that is a fundamental aspect of my nature? I can't. But that is what the scripture reveals to us, is that God has decreed these things are so. And he has also decreed them not only in writing in the form that he said it, but also in the sense that he has made us in his image and written his law on all of our hearts. which means we kind of just intuitively understand some of these things, although not perfectly, of course. And I don't think it's reasonable for Christian philosophers to go any further than that, because the other answers just don't work, in my opinion.
I mean, most people mean something very simple, like if it's evil, you shouldn't do it.
Well, I don't think that violates anything that I said, though. I mean, if you shouldn't do it, then why shouldn't you do it? Right? It's the same thing as saying, why is it evil? And so I'd say, well, because
Right.
it
So then
violates
now you
God's
have a
commands.
problem, right? If you think that God wills X, right? That means if he given his will, that's a reason for him. And if he has a reason to do it, then he should do it. And so now he's willing something evil, which means that he should.
Well, I don't know that a reason means that you should do something, though, right? Like, I have a reason to eat Frosted Flakes in the morning, but that doesn't.
Then you should do it. All things being equal, you should do it.
I could have an equally valid reason to eat a different.
No, all things being equal, you should do it.
Well, why though? Because all things being equal, if I have two different cereals which I enjoy the same, which have the same nutritional value,
you're just ignoring the all things being equal clause. All things being equal mean given absent any other reason. If you have a reason to do X, I should do X.
Wait, so hang on. I think I'm not exactly getting your objection here, because I don't.
What it means to say all things being equal is to say bracketing any other concern like competing desires, competing reasons. If I have a reason to do something, I should do it.
Yeah, see, I don't know. I just don't. I feel like that doesn't follow though, because it seems to me like, and perhaps I'm just misunderstanding that. I might just have to look into the alternate being or all things being equal kind of thing, and maybe there's terminology there that I'm not just privy with, right, or something.
It just means get rid of competing desires, because obviously they're competing goods, right? If I have a reason to eat frosted cereal, that could be true while I have a reason not to eat Frosted Flakes. I might have a reason to have a milkshake, right? But then there we're talking about competing reasons, right? Now, if we're just talking about a case where we have most reason or a singular reason to do something, then all things being equal, given that there are no other competing desires, we should do it. We should do it.
Oh, I wanted to ask you guys about the competing. Is there a difference conceptually or just in the nature of reality between the idea of determinism in a more physical scientific sense, and then in the sense of
Yes, I think so. There are people that disagree, but there are certain compatibilists that differentiate between different types of determinism. So physical or natural determinism has to do with causation,
causal chain kind of thing.
Causation necessitated by laws. So if A causes B, well, there could be a further explanation in that there's a law that for every time you have an A, you'll always have a B. But then some people accept the opposite of that as something called singular causation, which is the idea that A causes B, but there's not a further explanation to it. No law, no theory.
That gets deep, man. It's just literally dominoes falling over, right? But
the dominoes, there are laws governing those causal connections.
Even then, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In science, in most things that I can think of, consciousness is an undefined variable. So as long as that fact exists, there's no answer that you're going to be able to find unless you've solved I can't say Fermat's theory, whatever, that you've solved the mystery. Then you can go and create artificial intelligence and that. But I think that once you hit down to that core level of because once you get there, then there is no you as far as I can logically.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there are very good reasons to reject that consciousness or the mind is outside the purview of science.
Well, but then the question is, because oftentimes when I'm thinking, I can't really find a reason to deny, just kind of everyday idea about scientific causation just in the physical world, right? And I tend to think, I'm a physicalist, right? And it's just kind of funny that seems like the dualist would be more inclined to appeal to free will in some mysterious sense of how the mind interacts or the soul interacts with the physical world, but it seems like
I think compatibilists could I mean, like, I'm a compatibilist. I'm not a naturalist. I think the mind is unnatural. So that's to say I'm a dualist. So I think the kind of causation that occurs in the mind is not the same type of causation that occurs between dominoes.
So are you appealing, like, how does the qualia of consciousness become a causal? How does it start the causal chain in the physical world?
Yeah, so qualia, there's two different questions here. There's intentionality, which it doesn't involve qualia, right? So, and then...
Yeah, that was a bad word. I mean like the mental state, like how does that interact and touch, cause a chain of reaction into the physical world? Like, where does that touch? Where do those touch?
Are you talking about the, like, interaction problem?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wrote a paper on that, actually. So my view about the interaction problem is that dualists have very good reasons to think that it's a nonsense question. Because let's just kind of make it as simple as I can. When we appeal to our reasons as explanations for our behaviors, to appeal to a further mechanism as to how our reasons interact with our bodies will then jeopardize our appeal to our reasons as explanations for our behaviors. Right. So
interesting. Send me that if you can.
Yeah. So the idea is that why was I nice to Jamie? Well, Jamie's nice to me. That's my reason. Or I want to be a moderator, right? But if there's a further explanation for how that reason interacts with my behaviors, right? Then that's what explains why I behave that way, not my reason. And I don't think we can have that. If that makes any sense. It's kind of controversial.
Say that again. I think it did. I'm trying to, like, grab it with my mind.
Okay, so let me just give an more intuitive example, right? So suppose someone asks you, why are you nice to Jamie on his stream? And someone says, and I reply, someone says that to me, and I reply that, well, I wanted to be a moderator, so I was nice to Jamie. So then the scientist comes in and says, no, it's not whatever. No, it's these neurons and these atoms, right, that are configuring into your decision. What does that seem to do? It seems to undermine the explanation that you had that reason that informed your behaviors and your actions, right? So what the interaction problem is that how is it that a mental state, like a reason or an intentional state, like a belief or desire, interacts with the body, or which is a physical thing? The thing is that if there's some further mechanism, right, then as to the interaction between that, then you're appealing to a kind of overarching theory that is really the explanation for all of your actions and not your given reason. It's sort of like the idea is that if you explain the superficial phenomena, which are your reasons, in terms of some underlying phenomena, then that causes the kind of first level phenomena to be kind of governed by the underlying phenomena, and so you're not in control of anything.
You're explaining away the mental reasons that you're appealing to describe what it's doing, or the why.
Exactly.
And you're just reducing it to the configuration of particular physical attributes of that happen to correlate with that thought or whatever.
Yeah. So it's simply the case that if I was nice to, why is it that I chose to be nice to Jamie rather than not? And I say, well, I wanted to be a moderator. That's the end. That's the end explanation in terms of the immediate behavior that I had and the states, the mental states that preceded it. Now, there might be a story as to why I have those reasons, and you can go as far back as you want. Okay. But in terms of, if I said something nice to you, why did I say something nice to you? Because I had a reason to do it. Why did I have that reason to do it? You can go back and far back. But to ask, okay, what's the underlying explanation for your reason affecting that behavior is a nonsense question, because if I provide an answer for that, that will undermine my reason's explanation.
So what are you? So this kind of gets to the heart of what I'm trying to articulate.
Paint a picture. The underlying factors of that in that case would be every single thing you've ever been through, all the neurons in your body, your genetics, everything put together. All of those elements basically is a unique.
I think that what that explains is why I have the reason, but that's not the question, right? The question is, why did I choose to behave in this way rather than that way? And there's going to be an immediate preceding mental state. And then the interaction problem is that, okay, that mental state is non-physical. How is it that mental state, that reason, interacted? What's the mechanism by which that mental state interacts with your body such that you said something nice to Jamie? Whatever I provide there will then be an underlying explanation that sort of puts basically takes the reasons explanation I give and just completely undermines it.
It's just it's a figment. It's a
happy. It's just there. It's just happy. It's almost like a kind of epiphenomenalism. Really, the underlying, and that's why I don't think that the interaction problem isn't a problem, because it doesn't make sense to ask at a point what's the underlying mechanism by which this mental state interacts with these physical states.
I don't seem to have a disagreement with any of that, because it still seems, in light of looking at a creator God who's omniscient, that he could create beings that can make these choices and do things, and still that they can choose one thing or the other. He can know what they're going to choose at the same time as not being.
Yeah, I don't think what I'm saying is against.
Like it's two levels. It kind of makes it that way.
Well, look, I'm saying that there could be explanations for why I have that reason that you could give. Why did Danny want to be a moderator? Because YouTube gives these sorts of privileges to moderators. And why did they do that? And you can go, or, you could talk about a whole history, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's not what the interaction problem is that's posed against dualism. What the interaction problem is against dualism is, hey, there's this mental state, this reason, this intentional state, whatever. Okay. And there's an immediate effect of some bodily state. Okay. So they're immediate to each other. There's no event sort of in between. And what they're asking is that, what is the underlying mechanism by which this mental state interacts or affects this bodily state? And I'm saying that if you appeal to an underlying factor, underlying mechanism, you've undermined your reason's explanation for what happened when your body behaved in a certain way. Or
the mental state is just like you said, an epiphenomenon. It's like a happenstance of that's just like it's like a joke.
Well, I think that could certainly be applied to lots of. Consciousness in itself is a kind of a collection of things. So certain things that we do, habits, I think it could absolutely be applied to that as far as bringing it down to a
really quick, guys. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just got to say, I actually have to hop off. I apologize.
Bye, CJ.
You guys have a good rest of your day. It's good talking to you.
And something else, Jamie. There's another thing right here. Then I think that and there's a whole web of thought process here, but I'll just get. There's a couple of assumptions here. One of my assumptions is that I kind of take for granted that if you should do something, you can do it. Okay.
Oh, yeah. That's what I was going to say too. Should implies could, right?
Yeah. Should ought implies can, should implies could. Yes. And so here's the idea. When I say I've made a mistake, I look back and I say, I should have done differently. That means I could have done differently. Right? The idea of laws of necessitation, like a causal necessitation, actually make it such that whatever action I took was necessitated and I could have not done otherwise. So it's actually irrational to look back and say, I did X, but I should have done X. Right? And I don't want to let go of that. So that's why I think that the sort of causation that occurs on the mind body level has to be different than the sort of causation that would occur in the domino, because the domino is governed by strict laws of physics. It can't do otherwise given those laws. right?
Yeah. And I'm hearing, and I'm not just hearing dominoes clacking right now. No, I hear you.
Yeah, and so there's, and also I think that even if the interaction problem went through, there's going to be an interaction problem on physicalism, because once again, there's going to be immediate states of cause and effect on physical states. What would it mean to ask for a further mechanism between each of these immediate states on physicalism? They would just say it's just simply there's a cause and effect. They could appeal to a law, which they will, but that's not a mechanisms involve other events, right? Other underlying states, but laws are not states of affairs that interact causally.
Right.
So now I just think that, and then there's, even if you didn't know any of this, it's just simply not a good objection to say, how does it interact? And then the duelist might not have good responses. There might not be. What if they were to say, I don't really know?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Well, I don't really know. How does that mean that, how does that imply that they should revise their view?
Good
right?
point. Yeah.
There's a difference between knowing that something versus know how something happens. I know that my hands are, I'm making this motion, but I don't know how exactly it's doing it given all the neurological circuitry, right? There's a lot that I don't know in terms of how it happens, but I know that it happens, right? So if some neurologist was quizzing me, well, how is it that this part of the brain interacts with the neuron, the tips of your fingers? They might have a good physicalist picture of that, but I don't need to know that all those mechanisms to know that my fingertips are moving and that somehow my brain has something to do with that. You see what I'm saying? So it's just like, it's such a weak objection to anything, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
true.
Now, some people take the interaction problem and they try to formalize it to something called causal closure arguments. Those are a little bit more sophisticated, but they're not sort of you kind of lose sight of the sort of intuitions that people that in causal closure arguments are saying, hey, for every, they operate on this, how on the Kalam, there's like a principle that for everything that begins to exist, well, typically as a cause.
Yep.
They have their own principle. For every physical effect, you'll have a physical cause.
It's like a really basic version of a cause and effect, right? I mean,
right. It's it's called causal closure of the physical, and they appeal to this principle to rule out dualism. But why should I accept such a principle? I mean, I think, but at least they try, right? Whereas like the unsophisticated versions of interaction problems are just like, how,
well, like the idea is that like if it seemed like it is kind of just an appeal to like almost like Occam's razor. It's like, well, if this seems to be, but it's just it seems to be.
But the problem with Occam's razor here is that you're sort of granting the dualist that it's coherent, right? So then you're saying that, hey, both models work. If it's Occam's razor that's making the decision, you're saying, yeah, both models work, but my model posits less entities, right?
Yeah.
So, but
that's what I was appealing to there. Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is that Occam's razor is saying, hey, look, what you're saying is coherent. It makes logical sense, but there's no justification to posit these extra entities. My model posits less, but we do have justifications, I think, under dualism, given some of the considerations of ought implies can, causal laws, free will, even morality. All these things, to me, all these issues are very intertwined. And so if it's the case that I have a good reason to posit an extra entity, then Occam's razor is no longer if I'm sort of randomly coming to dualism, I'm like, it's just, it seems intuitive, then I think they have a case, right? If they're not positing a problem of coherence, then yeah, they could appeal to Occam's razor. But all you have to do to diffuse Occam's razor is saying, I have a justification for positing this extra ontological category.
And then some people might say, well, that could lead some people to like say, well, that, consciousness isn't real, whatever that means. But
yeah, I think that's self-defeating. You probably understand why too, right?
Yeah. I forget what channel it was. It was really interesting. It was the guy I've seen on Capturing Christianity who's that blonde. He's like this blonde guy. He talks about, I think he's a dualist, and he's talking about likes to talk about philosophy. I can't. His name will come to me in a second, but he was talking to this guy who had a channel, and I'll have to send you that. It was really interesting.
Okay.
They were talking about the one. It seemed that the kid that was interviewing him. What's his name? The guy. He's like a philosopher or whatever. But he
the blonde guy, is he the elate person? The deflate, something like that? Does he have an accent?
Well, I don't want to describe him because I don't want to be. He's like
American.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, then it's not who I'm
And
thinking.
he's like he was like
Blonde, huh?
he was what's his name? He is he's clearly like a really smart guy. He just he knows the literature.
Young or old?
Young.
So
I think
young.
he's been on Capturing Christianity talking about like about the universe like fine-tuning arguments maybe.
Oh, there's a guy that does that. His name is Luke Barnes.
That's who it is. Yep, that's
oh,
him.
he's kind of older.
Yeah,
Yeah.
tripping. I just ran across it randomly, and
Luke Barnes is pretty smart. He's pretty famous for the fine tuning stuff. But I think I don't know if he's a philosopher though. I think he's just philosophically inclined, but he has like a PhD in physics or something.
Yeah,
like that.
it may not even be him that I'm thinking of. That I may be mixing another guy with him. But
ooh, I'm sorry.
I texted you about they were talking about bare particulars, and they were.
Is this recent?
Yeah. He was reviewing. They were reviewing Shannon Q's defense of like a naturalist physicalism.
Oh my God, Shannon Q, what a mess.
But it was pretty interesting.
Let me look, see if there's anything recent. Yeah, I think that the problem with liminativism is I just don't know what it would make sense. Then there's a sense in which you don't disagree with them, right? Because like, well, right. Like because because they don't exist, right? Like they're like they would say that I believe that I have no beliefs or something like that, which is just contradictory. But there are different types of eliminativism. There's some people that are not eliminativist about intentionality, but eliminativist about qualia. I really don't know what to say to them because I think qualia is kind of an elusive concept for me, if it even is a concept. So I think dualist arguments that start with qualia, I kind of just ignore. I'm more interested in intentionality.
So you're agnostic, right?
To theism.
Christianity.
Oh no, I'm pretty sure that God does not exist.
If there's a monotheistic, if there was a God, there would be one God.
I'd be an atheist. With respect to any monotheistic tradition.
Why?
Well, not tradition. I mean, even Plato believed that there was one God.
You don't accept that?
That one singular God, if there was one, that there would be one of them and not many of them, right?
Yeah, I don't think that those formulations are coherent either.
Really? That there would be something
describe that a little bit.
Or many? Well, I guess I would derail everything.
Sorry, what, Jamie?
I said ruin my faith, Danny, to explain why you think neither of those models are coherent or whatever. Why would you say that? Just you don't have to get deep into it, but like
I could think of some reasons probably, but again, why would you try to? Well, that'd be interesting to hear.
Well, I guess the simple one, I mean, you've heard me talk about, is the problem of evil, but there are other fundamental problems that get really philosophical.
No. I'm just talking about. I just meant that whether or not unless you're saying that if there was a single creator God that he must be good. Which I agree with, actually, but I didn't want to add.
I don't believe in God because Will Kincaid exists.
No, I think that here's one problem that I have with just generally God concepts is that I think that the way I understand an intentional state, so like a belief or desire, is the sort of state that creates the possibility of success or failure. And so I think that's sort of built into the idea of having a view of the world or having a desire about how the world should be.
That's why like people invented a God, or because that seems to describe what.
No, I don't want to say that. I'm not.
What God is that force.
I'm saying that it doesn't really make sense to say that God desires anything or that he believes anything.
Well, it depends on again, this gets right down around everything you've been talking about as far as the heart of consciousness, desire, choices. what interacts with what, whom interacts with whom, and that sort of thing. Like, what exactly is it? Is like, what is the most fundamental change in the universe that we can know of, which is just emotion. So if there's emotion, there has to be a towards. So emotion towards something. So then there's direction. So once you start adding these elements to things, I think that can be applied to creation from if God being something that's, or someone that's the primary source of all of this, of anything that would have a direction or have emotion, and that sort of thing. So, what was my point here? Desires. So I guess it's all would be kind of relational from if God, who is a sort of primeval desire, which would be a desire towards motion, and I believe in the Trinity, which in the Spirit would be motion, him in motion with himself. I don't want to get into all that, but as far as creating other things that have their own motion within space and that sort of thing, I think I guess my point is desire is related in some way to motion in general when it comes, however that makes sense.
Yeah, but the idea is that motion, you see, I take beliefs and desires, given that they create the possibility of success or failure, that they are actually normative in and of themselves. They're normative states. But motion,
like something falling, like you can't say that a rock desires to go towards the center of gravity, but that's kind of what determinism is saying, as far as like
certain types
is in my thought towards this or that is kind of, even if you take it all the way back to the Big Bang, everything is just a motion of the explosion, little swirls of this giant explosion that's just going on, even down to the atomic level in our brains. That's just.
Well, I'm not so sure where you're going. I'm just saying that,
I don't believe that.
motion simpliciter doesn't provide a standard for anything, right? So if X moves to a new location, or X affects Y such that Y it changes location over a duration, that doesn't provide any standard of to where you can evaluate success or failure. But beliefs and desires can do that. And so the idea is that God, given his omnipotence, his infallibility, couldn't have these states, because having such states with those sorts of properties, being infallible and omnipotent, imply the impossibility of failure. So that's to say that I can't differentiate between God desires X and X happens, or God believes X and X is true. So the set of God's, let's say, beliefs about how the world is indistinguishable from the all true propositions of that world. But the idea is that the propositions, all true propositions of that world.
When you say God's belief about how the world is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't that,
it's knowledge, isn't it?
Imply a lot of things as far as a world existing external to God, that he is in and that he is among. Naturally.
Well, that's another thing, is that I take minds to be a perspective of the world. And so if there's no world, there just can't be a mind.
Well, again, hearing that we don't really know what a mind is, my view is that the Trinity.
I told you what I took a mind to be.
Well, that's fair. I mean, that's you just gave a number of strings in a web. Obviously, it's what is causing the desires, right? And that's where
I'm saying, look, a mind is something like that which has a point of view.
Consciousness? Is that what you...
I mean, I don't know what. Look, it's this talk of explaining consciousness to me is like, I don't know what they're talking about when they're trying to explain consciousness. I think that we have a very good account of what consciousness is, given our own the intimacy of our own conscious states. I take intentionality to be a perspective of the world. Well, how a point of view, right? This Tylenol has no point of view. It has no mind. It doesn't have a perspective about how things are. Okay, I have a mind, so I have a perspective on how things are. But that presupposes an external world, right? It doesn't make sense to say that there's a perspective of the world when there's no world.
Well, can't a mind exist without a world? Or I mean, without the world, I guess I would say. I mean, theoretically, I mean, I don't know.
Well,
That's almost
so then you might have a different.
There could be, then there could be a God.
I mean, I think if God existed, he would have beliefs about things, right?
Would he exist in a world, even if that world was just his mind?
Right, exactly, right. But I think that the idea here is that beliefs are sort of disconnected from they're not a special access to a state of affair. So in other words, if I believe that it's raining outside, there's a kind of aim at how the world is. There's a perspective of the world, and it doesn't establish that that's the way the world is in fact. But God, right, is a being that has this sort of access, supposedly, is infallible. God doesn't believe that X is true, right? And in the sense that like he's aiming for how the world is. He doesn't aim. He's infallible. The idea of an aim is that there's the possibility of success or failure.
And it depends on what your view is of the entire the goals, because in order for there to be this logical God, there would have to be a logical outcome of what everything would be, and then how all this fits into it that we're seeing, which is
quite confident I haven't understood you there, but I'm saying this. I guess answer this question. What is the difference between God's beliefs and the set of all true propositions? What's the difference?
I don't think we'd be really qualified.
Instantiation.
Instantiation.
Wouldn't we have to know about God to really answer that?
No.
He could couldn't he believe things that maybe I misunderstood something you said, but couldn't he believe things?
What was the second thing?
So look, there's the set of God, what God believes, right? And there's the set of all true propositions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, my bad.
All right. So what's a true proposition? Explain that to me.
That which is true.
Okay. Meaning like it has to be something that's logical, that is being recognized by something.
Not even.
How can it be true if it's not being recognized as being true?
Well, there are presumably there are truths when humans don't recognize them, right? So like the proposition that it's raining on the other side of Mars, right? There's going to be a truth value to that, and it may be the case that no one has an attitude of it. So the idea is that a true proposition doesn't establish anything mental. Okay.
It could even be a potential.
Yeah, but it's a proposition, meaning somebody is proposing it, right?
Oh no, I'm using proposition in a philosophical.
I mean, I know it's theoretical. I'm not.
Yeah. All in philosophy, all a proposition is that which can be true or false. And
it has it has a truth value or
a truth value, right?
Mm-hmm. And so it could be a proposition. Could be hypothetical.
Does God know anything that's not true?
Well, the fact is that God's beliefs are going to be indistinguishable from the set of all true propositions.
So I think anything true has to be true in relation to something else. So if God creates like 50,000 things.
Wait, why is that true? Tell me why you think that.
That something has to be true in relation to something else.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
It distinguishes.
How
I didn't think that's necessary, actually. I think they're synonyms.
Probably have to really dissect what I just said. So repeat it again.
Yeah. So I take certain things to be true themselves, as they're called propositions. They can also be false themselves. Okay. So that's what a proposition is.
In relation to two different things. Yeah. Are you agreeing with me or you're disagreeing with me?
Well, no,
Okay.
I mean that I don't. You're adding more to the picture, and I'm trying to understand why.
If something for something to be true or false, there would have to be two states. Is that what I'm
defending?
Well, I'm trying to obviously fit the way I look at it with the way you're looking at it.
Well, have you understood what a proposition is?
Your,
have you understood? Like, look, if I say that it's raining outside, and then you were to hear someone else say or express the belief that está lloviendo afuera, those are two different sentences, but they express the same truth or falsity. And whatever that is a proposition.
Okay, yeah. Well, whatever you're saying in relation to God, I think that He's omniscient, that He knows.
Yeah, so I'm saying that God's omniscient
would ever happen. So obviously He knows everything that He's ever going to do, and He knows everything that.
Yeah. So what's the distinction between
in creation?
I guess if what I'm trying to point out is something like this. The set of.
I mean, I can give you a whole bunch of really what I think are good examples and analogies, but you can.
You have to understand. I think you have to.
It's really.
I want to flesh this out, though.
Antiseptic kind of.
I want you to understand my point here. And the point is that.
Sorry.
You have a real name, right? And Kelvy's not your real name, is it?
No.
Okay, so let's say your real name is John. Okay.
Sean.
John or whatever. Okay, Sean. Okay, so the set of things that John believes that is going to be the same set of things that Kelvy believes, right? They're the same set, even though they have a different sense. They have a different name. Okay, what I'm trying to say is that very much like that case, right? The same set. The set of true propositions is going to be the same set of God's beliefs. They're going to be indistinguishable sets.
That's fine.
Okay, so the problem is, though, that true propositions, that's not mental. That's not a proposition being true does not express a mental state. So if they're identical, if God's beliefs
do I know if I feel happy or sad? Like if I'm standing there, somebody feels happy or feels sad. I mean, is that physical or not? You know, that's a physiological or biophysical or whatever.
I'm not so sure how that relates.
I guess that's the question of what's not physical.
It doesn't have to do with physical or non-physical. What I'm trying to say is that the set of truths of the world is an indistinguishable set from the set of God's beliefs. There's no distinguishing property between those two sets. Now, there is going to be a distinction if you think that God can fail, because beliefs can imply an aim at the truth, and aims imply the possibility of success or failure.
What would God fail at? So you're saying because he doesn't have something that he could fail at, that therefore he can't be true because he has to have something that.
One of the points that he doesn't fail, right? He can't fail, right? But nonetheless, he has this sort of intentionality where it implies failure, because I think intentionality implies the possibility of failure.
Why?
Because they're normative. Intentional states are normative states. So a normative expression is something like this. I should do X.
I agree with you, actually. But I don't agree with you in a state of an eternal being. But I do agree with you in anything that's locked within its own like time scale. That makes complete sense. But in a being that's in some state where it's not locked within any before after thing, which I don't know how, what kind of mind is the mind of God, but I think that's where that can't work.
Well, you asked me why I was an atheist. I think Jamie knew. I think that what I usually talk about is the problem of evil, but more fundamentally is I don't know what it means to say that there's a mind that's infallible. I think that's the fundamental issue for me. But it's a little bit less.
What's an example of God failing though? So I mean, in my view, it's very simple. God.
That's not even the problem. It's that he can possibly that it's the possibility of failure. It might be the case that God never fails.
Circumstance? In what? I mean, are you like? Why are you inserting this?
Well, no, but look, the point is that there's no circumstance in which God fails. That's the problem, right? Is that there's no circumstance in which God fails. But an intentional state implies the possibility of failure. That implies a contradiction.
What do you mean by intention? Like creating?
Like a desire or belief. Intentional state.
Okay, so because I have to hold it up against my own view, right?
I'm sorry, yeah.
So in my view, before God created, which before doesn't really apply because before is still within time, but outside of time, there is God who is his own motion within himself, his own order and form within himself, and his own self within himself, his own existence within himself. Like that, there is some form there. It's not a singular Unitarian like blob, right? So there's some form of order, and I think that within that order is where we see what, and that's where I'm going on with the motion versus form, which is the source. So anyway, he creates a world, he creates a universe in which they have these attributes of form and motion, and so let's look at the universe in two different ways. Everything that's just simply moving of its own accord or of its own motion, or the spirit of which God has put it in motion, in my view, which is just the natural spinning of nebula and black holes and leaves blowing in the wind. And then there's some other system or pattern which is endowed with its own version of desire. So we do have this thing, and that you're calling desire, but then you're looking at it, this thing that you have called desire that was given to you by God, and then you're looking at it and applying it up to God and saying, why don't you have this thing? I think is what you're.
Do you think that God has desires? Do you think God has beliefs?
Yes.
Okay, so whatever that sense of belief is what I have a problem with. That sense of belief implies an aim at the truth, but God doesn't aim at anything. He never fails. The aim just implies the fact that he's reached the goal, the end. Whereas,
isn't that like a question? Why does a painter paint a picture?
No. Look, here, think of it this way: if you believe that it's raining outside, does that make it true? No. But what a belief that it's raining outside is a commitment. A commitment prescribes a rational duty unto yourself, or a practical duty in the case of a desire. But it just doesn't make sense for God to that he should believe X because or that he should do X, Y, Z.
Yeah, but it's still a matter of if I told you it was raining outside and you've never seen rain before and never heard about it or saw any pictures of it or knew anything about it.
I'm confused. I'm just saying that what I'm trying to point out is that beliefs are normative in the sense that they are rational prescriptions to not believe the opposite, right? And so the idea is that if it's a prescription, then there's a possibility.
Not necessarily opposite, right?
What?
Not necessarily opposite.
Well, the idea is that if you take X to be true, then that's a commitment to not believe the opposite, right? That's a reason not to believe the opposite. If I believe that you're a good person, that's a reason not to believe that you're a bad person.
It's still way simple. I mean, if we're choices are a lot more than one thing or another, right? As far
what
as
is a lot more
the way things work, the way.
If you have it seems like if you believe that it's raining outside, you're committed to that truth, are you not? If you believe it.
Okay, so you have to know what rain is. Obviously, you have to have that piece of information. You have to either believe.
But that doesn't matter, right?
Well,
Look.
What is? You're talking about the personal perception of truth.
No, I'm not. Look, to me, this is very simple. If you believe X, then you're committed to X being true. All things being equal. Otherwise, I don't know what you mean by belief anymore.
Yeah, that's what it means to believe, right? You're committed to that is the case.
Yeah. And if you are committed to that being the case, then you should not believe the opposite.
So, okay, so you're, or
Well,
maybe
wait.
Maybe it's me conflating belief.
You can contradict yourself, Jamie, right?
So if I'm standing there and you look at me and say it's raining outside and I can see that it's raining, are you going to tell me that I believe that it's raining?
No, what are you talking about? Look, I'm just saying that if you believe that it's raining outside, you might have a good reason not to. Okay? You might be really good. Yeah, if you believe that it's raining outside, that means you're committed to the truth that it's raining outside.
Danny, that was funny that one time when you're I don't mean to make fun of anybody or anything, but like sometimes people don't understand, and I'm not saying necessarily about Kelby or whatever, but it reminded me of when with the peanut butter thing. It's like, look, he's just saying, it's like the if, right? You know, you're just like, it's a
with LPP, I really made them angry.
And I was like, I don't know. I'm so smart. I got what you were.
You got what I was saying?
It didn't offend me at all because I'm like, it's like, no, you guys, just saying.
Yeah, I really think it's crazy.
Explain this to me again. If I know that if you tell me it's raining.
No, stop. No. All we know, if you believe that it's raining outside. Okay, we're starting there. I don't care how you came to that belief. It might not even be true. It doesn't matter. Okay. If you believe that it's raining outside, what that entails is that you're committed to the truth that it's raining outside.
That's literally like it is the case. It's just
No, it doesn't. I don't see.
Okay, then I don't know what you mean by belief.
I'm committed that it might be raining outside. Otherwise, I know that it's raining.
Well, that's a different look. Those are two different beliefs. Those are two different. The belief that it might be raining outside is different than the belief that it is raining outside. You just changed the belief.
Otherwise, you're crazy.
Why wouldn't I say I'm not really going to believe that it's raining outside until I see
Forget this, right? Let's just use a variable, okay? I believe that P stands for some proposition. Okay, it doesn't matter what it is. What that means is that you're committed to P being true.
Yeah, maybe we're just disagreeing on what belief is, or maybe we apply a belief differently.
I just don't, what would it mean to say, I believe in this, but I'm not committed to it being true? All things being equal.
Are you talking about faith? I have faith.
No, faith is a type of belief. It just you might stipulate where
it's just faith, a different reason to believe something, or
it might be. Yeah, it might have to do with how you came to the belief or the confidence that you place in that belief. But that doesn't matter, right? The fact is, if you believe X, it doesn't matter what your confidence level is. If it's still true that you believe it, right? Yeah, you could believe X with little confidence or with a lot of confidence. The fact is that either way, you have a commitment to rational commitment unto yourself, right?
If P, then
I don't think it is rational. I don't think there is a rational commitment to. I don't think. Unless
the rational commitment to rationality.
Well, no, to say to recognize that I don't have 100% truth on a matter, and to say that it could be one way or another. I don't, and just accepting that as
maybe you want to. Do you want to explain it, Jamie? Is there something I'm missing here, Jamie?
Well, I think this is maybe the problem with like belief and knowledge. There's something to do with that, I think, going on here. Like,
yeah, but knowledge complicates things because knowledge is factive, right? And it's factive because it has a truth component to it. But
I mean the confusion
is that's what he might be confused on.
Yeah, because sometimes I think it's easy to conflate the two, and I'm probably not explaining it good, but I know like sometimes people because that comes up all the time. Like when people are arguing, someone will say, they'll conflate belief and knowledge, and then the other person will be like, well. They'll presume it means, Cartesian certainty. And it's like, no. Belief is different. And that's like a commitment
Maybe this might help. Kelvy, what do you think it means to say you believe that X?
That I have enough information to have made a rational distinction.
No,
that this
you're
might
you're
be
talking
the
about
truth.
knowledge.
I'm not kidding.
You're talking
I
about
don't
knowledge
say I
or
believe
something.
something unless I freaking logically
You're talking about
have
something
a
different.
reason to believe it.
Yeah, you're just talking about
Up
knowledge.
to the point where I recognize I don't have 100% certainty. Just like
Yeah.
if somebody says, "Do you believe the world's flat?" Have you ever been up there and seen the curve? Then you can't 100%.
I think you're just talking about something different than you're talking about, like knowledge and justification and confidence and certainty. None of that. You don't need to
none
know.
of that apply to any of this unless you're making the decision to pick it apart.
Okay. Do you know? Do you
Certain-
accept the justified true belief formula for knowledge?
I don't know what that is.
What do you take knowledge to be? Do you take it to be
Something people
justified true
know.
belief?
Something
what's
that's
the
known, whether it's true or false.
Oh dear.
A
Okay.
set of data.
I didn't realize that we're just literally speaking two different languages.
You don't know how to speak English? Sorry, I can let you guys get going.
You know, look, hey guys. If I didn't mean to.
I'm a literal philosophy dropout, dude.
It's fine. I mean, no, but I should be wary. So I guess what philosophers mean by, well, the starting point for how we understand knowledge is something like you only know something if you have a good reason for it, or you have justification, if it's true, and if you believe it.
If it's true. So you just said if it's true.
That's knowledge, right? It doesn't make sense to say that you know something that's false.
It's true. Like, so you added that.
No, look, no, I didn't say that. I said this. You only know something if and only if you believe it, if it's true, and
you only know something if it's true.
No. Listen, you need three conditions for knowledge in the traditional Platonic sense, right? That number one, you have to believe it.
Really
you can't know.
I've read some Plato, but
Plato came up with this formula, right? Just listen, okay? First, the idea is that you can only know something if you believe it. It doesn't make sense to say, "I know this, but I don't believe it." Okay? If you don't believe it, there's no way you can know it. Okay? I don't know God exists because I don't believe it. Okay?
That prerequisite.
Yeah, it's a prerequisite. The second condition is that you got to have a good reason. I can't know that you're a pedophile given that there's no good evidence, no good reason to believe that. Right? No evidence. Okay? So the idea is that to know something, you have to have a good reason for it. And the last criterion is that it's got to be true. I can't. Okay? So I can't know that you're a pedophile if it's not even true.
If you're not one.
You're right. If you're not one, it's got to be true that you are and you're not, right? So the idea here is that you have to have all three. At least this is the starting point for for certain formulations of knowledge. People usually add on to it for what it means to know something.
But really quick, by the way, I want to make this clear. I have a lot of respect for you, Kelby. Just so you know, I'm not laughing at you. It's just I've talked about this with other people, and anyways.
It's been since high school, dude. It's all good. It's elementary school.
Yeah, so the idea is that what I'm analyzing is one of these criteria, the belief criteria.
You're basically saying we should walk around pretending like we know truth. That's what it sounds like to me.
It's not what I said at all. Kelby, you need to follow these conversations, man.
I think we often do, though. But yeah.
I mean, if you're pretending to know something, then you don't know it.
Yeah, it's like definition
between knowing something and knowing something about something, possibly.
I'm convinced.
Do you not have that distinction in your head?
Knowing about something versus knowing what?
Like we can talk about something that, like a fact. We're both sitting on a computer or a phone. We're sitting on a device speaking. That's something that is a truth that we can say that we know is happening.
Okay. Versus like knowing about math or something.
Sure, I don't know anything about math, so.
Yeah, the idea when we say that I know about math, we're talking about a set of mental states that meet the requisites for knowledge.
If I start telling you some crazy story about my uncle, man, he went out on the farm the other day and he had a car and he ran up and he jumped it right into the water, man. And it was crazy. You have no reason to believe that. You have no reason to really not believe it. It's just kind of one of those things. Now you can walk away the rest of your life and somebody could go and tell you the same story. But, oh, I know somebody now all of a sudden that becomes a fact in your mind and that really happened. That's kind of the way you're describing this.
Maybe I'm just going to assign you some reading because I think that might help.
I think when you talk about knowledge, there's a reason, like you have to that's presuming that it's true if you're calling it knowledge, right? I mean,
right.
It's like a prerequisite.
It's like saying it implies it logically speaking. If you're a bachelor, it implies you're unmarried. If you know it implies
presumption that you have lined up the proper amount of data together to make that decision that it's true. That's the decision that you've made that it's true or not. That's what the mind consciousness factor is that nobody really understands.
Right.
Look, I think you should go ahead, Jamie.
I was just gonna say, and this is what happened in that peanut butter conversation in a way, because oftentimes these conversations,
Did I start that or something? I think
that wasn't you.
Part of that.
No, I don't remember.
I know I was involved in that somehow.
Well, I feel like, I've done the same thing before too, and I still do it all the time. Like where you're in this certain mode of defensive mode or whatever. Not necessarily that either, but sometimes the conversation goes past two people because of the way these conversations go, and I'm trying to articulate how that happened with the peanut butter thing, and I try to intervene, and it's just talking past each other. It's like if you say something's knowledge, it's like we should agree right away that has a certain connotation, right? But people get into the hypothetical of an argument or whatever, and it gets.
I said knowledge is a set of data, but you're like, no, it's not that.
No, that can't be
not
that.
It can't be that because it doesn't fit into.
Well, actually,
there's data that you don't know about, right? You don't know that set of data unless you believe it.
That doesn't not apply.
Look, do I have data in here? Do I have data in here?
Unknown data. So I have to say it's known or unknown data.
Yeah, the idea is that you don't know what's in here, right? And that's because you don't believe it, and you don't.
Well, there's got to be a distinction between knowledge and data, then, right? So
right.
Unknown knowledge is data. Does that not make sense either?
Unknown knowledge is data. Information. Okay, you're talking about true propositions. I think that's what you mean. Yeah.
I'm sorry you are unable and incapable of talking to somebody like they're an idiot.
Well, sorry about that.
It's kind of a compliment.
I think I'm going to give you a book, and I'm going to tell you to read a certain chapter. You only have to read a chapter, and that might help. And it's a Christian philosopher, so
he's done it to me too. So we can be in the student club. It's cool. Steve McRae was talking about this the other day, or a few months ago, and it was really interesting too.
I think you've built a set of tracks around this a forest, and I'm trying to walk you through the trees, and you're like, no, stay on the track.
Well, how did this start? He said, if you believe something.
You said that knowledge isn't.
No, that came after
of data.
Yeah,
no, it can't be that.
It's definitely no epistemologist thinks that. No epistemologist thinks that.
Well, what's another? Maybe give another.
What is a set of data then? What is? Okay, what between the
you're
words?
Just talking. You're just asking data. What information is, but there's not a really good consensus on that. But the Jamie, what was your?
Oh, a justified true belief. That's one.
Yeah, that's where you start, but. Most philosophers build on that. They contextualize what justification is exactly, and they might have different accounts of what justification is. So it's either they add to it, they become skeptical, and they don't think that there is knowledge, or they take the J and then mutilate it, or add,
because you could have unjustified true belief, or you could have
or they might say justification. You don't have to have access to your justification.
Yeah, right.
Stuff like that. So you have internalism and externalism about justification. But yeah, Kelvin, can you put your
sounds like a bunch of communist gobbledygook.
That's funny. Can you put your email, and I'll tell you what page to read. It's only like a couple pages, and that way you're in a better
I just sent
spot.
it to kelviquayo@gmail.
What is that called again? It's like is that the what justified true belief is a I'm spacing out. That's a form of what do they call it? Like of knowledge, or is that
Yeah, it's the formula for knowledge, the Platonic formula of knowledge. It was unchallenged until Gettier.
I don't believe any of this, Jamie. It's a priesthood. It's a priesthood of philosophy.
Yeah, I know. I don't believe. Oh, yeah,
Gnosticism.
Somebody like Nicholas said that in the stream today. Like, see, this is where philosophy or
I remember that
in the way, and I'm just like, dude, don't say that. Don't say that.
Yeah.
God doesn't believe, or God doesn't make things.
It's funny because he was saying that in response to the opposite argument from Danny as far as determinism, as far as causing not being.
It's a problem to believe two contradictory things about God, I think. I mean, isn't there some philosophers though that like say God literally makes what is logically like true? He could make illogical things true.
No, I argued with one Calvinist for like days and days and days, and eventually it just got down to them saying that God is above logic, and I'm just like,
but that's just like that gets into. There are not that many philosophers that go that far.
Right?
That's as far as we put it in a crucible, man.
I mean, there are a lot of Christian philosophers that think that God grounds knowledge, and but that is, but they're not. I don't think there are any Christian philosophers I know that say that God can like make true contradictions or something like that. No, they're fine with that. That's
Danny, in my view, God is like the source of data, of all data, raw data in general.
You see, you're not. Data is a vague term.
Yeah, I know that. Now, that would be motion in general.
Well, he's creator of all data, you could say.
Form and so breaking this down in the Trinity, spirit would be the raw data. Word, Father, Word, and Spirit. Spirit would be the data, the information itself, whatever it may be, what it's made of, as far as it's. I don't want to say we don't get too specific in all that, but then the Word is the actual form of it. Whatever kind of form it has of data that makes it readable, who's reading it, whatever, that's a whole other thing. And that's basically what we got.
Yeah.
We got to talk about that. Kelby, we got to talk about that sometime.
Well, in your view, I can see where you're forcing all these kind of, well, if it's not knowledge, where doesn't, we don't know what knowledge. Some people say that there's no such thing as knowledge. Like, what? There's like, okay, I can appreciate the.
They're not that. Those are very few.
No, I know, but as far as having a view that doesn't have some sort of an external source of all things, or which that is a complete and utter just blank slate. That's where you're coming from. You have to start with it from the human perception. It seems. I mean, I'm although I know a lot of philosophy does.
There's a whole debate about that, about where knowledge comes from, whether it's internal or external.
I got a checkmate for Danny. Danny, how do you know that's true?
I know what's true.
Anything, Danny. How do you ground truth?
I don't actually think. I think that some truths are grounded and some are not.
Well, is that true, Danny?
Yeah.
Who am I? How do you
redefine? You're talking about redefine.
You my words. You have my spirit, Danny. That's if I tell you my name, you believe my words. You have my spirit, and then part of me.
Did you put your email? Put your email in the private chat. I'm doing you a favor. I'm sending you a book. Read page 71. Read 10 pages, and you should be a lot better.
You're not going to turn me into a stark raving heathen, man.
It's a Christian philosopher. I don't know what you're getting.
Okay.
Danny, if your feet aren't on the ground, how do you have? Oh, never mind. I'm going to close down in a minute. I'm tired. I'm really tired.
Yeah, I'm getting tired myself.
Danny,
so do you know William Lane Craig Kelvey and J.P. Moreland?
Heretics.
They write a little intro to epistemology that might help you think through some of this stuff.
I'm gonna have to check with Alan White on that. Just
Okay. No, shit. Sorry.
This is a good Christian channel.
Well, it's like 3:30 in the morning, people. It's.
Oh, I got 12:30.
I got 2:25. Looks like you don't know.
Use that because that's from like.
True.
I have email in there from like 2000.
What time is it on Earth right now? Checkmate. There is no time on Earth. Time doesn't exist because. Is it true that it's
watch look like if you lived on Jupiter? You'd need like a microscope to see the numbers.
Numbers don't exist. Anyway, final words. God did it.
God did it.
God did it. Amen.
All right. Did you get his email?
I did, but I'm about to. Yeah, I did. I'm getting it.
You guys want to say anything?
Thanks for having me on. It was fun.
Yeah, dude. You can assign me reading too. Send me something I need to learn. Besides everything.
Yeah, are you a teacher?
I am.
That's great. This is my long tradition of frustrating teachers.
Hey, Janet, Cheryl, good to see you. Hi, Bob. See, I didn't block you, Bob. I like you, Bob.
Is that the other Bob?
I think that's Bob, the guy who should be
builder.
No, it's Bob, the backup actor for
King James.
Thou shall not pass. Thou shall not pass. I should have had that ready, hooked up for the outro here. Let's see. Anyways, guys, thanks. Hit like and subscribe so you get notified, and I can see you next time. And join if you ever want to. I'd love to talk to you guys. Anyways, have a good night, and thanks for coming, guys. I'll talk to you soon.